Hello and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm trying something different. I just created a first newsletter with Claude in which I told it to get the inspiration from our exchanges and from the different texts that I have been publishing on my website and everywhere else. So I thought, well, let's try to do something synthetic here, something different, and this is what I did. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to read it, and perhaps you will perhaps notice some difference in the way it is delivered and the way it works in terms of how it lands. So let's see. So I will be reading from my second screen. So the name of the title of the newsletter is Supervised Hybridization in Writing. So here we go. So I'm writing this sentence and then I'm not. The contradiction is the whole point of what follows. So let me be honest about it from the first line rather than burying it somewhere at the bottom. The way I sometimes do when I'm not sure how a confession will land. This piece was drafted by Claude under my direction, fed by my own writing, my own frameworks, and the conversations we have been having about this project. I supervised every choice that matters. I did not type every word. This is an exception, made for this specific occasion, and I want to think through it with you rather than just announce it and move on. Let's call it the thing itself, supervised hybridization, because it's part of my philosophy, right? Something that I have always thought is that if we are going to use AI, we have to supervise it and we have to make the right choices and judge our work more carefully like that. So not because I'm fond of clinical sounding terms, but because the phrase actually does some work. Hybridization because two different kinds of cognition are produced in one text. Mine, shaped by years of thinking in three languages and a particular obsession with agency, and Bono's, shaped by an almost incomprehensible amount of human writing compressed into weights. Supervised because none of the hybrid output reaches you without passing through my judgment first, the same way a translation doesn't reach a reader without passing through the translators. And by the way, this is something I will have to discuss at some point with automated translation, is that there is no human judgment, and that might have some implications. Well, those are some of the things that I want to do some research on, but that's a topic for another day. So I keep coming back to translation as the closest analogy, and it's not an accident. Anyone who has translated a text seriously knows the discomfort of this position. You are not the author, but you are also not a passive conduit. You make thousands of small decisions the original writer never had to make, and the final text carries your fingerprints even though the ideas aren't yours to claim. Translators have lived with this exact ambiguity for centuries and mostly made peace with it. Writers working with language models are just now being asked to. So where this fits inside this project, inside my own personal project. So if you've been reading along, you know the project runs on two frameworks. One is pedagogical, metacognition for language learning, the whole architecture I built around intentional language and the Spanish-speaking persona I described in an older newsletter. But here in this part is interesting because Claude got a lot from a particular newsletter I wrote when I had this Spanish project about the how do I call this one? It was the one with the internal dialogue and the reinforcement phrases that I did for a course. So anyway, the other is a translation workflow meant to let me work closely with authors and institutions I can have genuine conversations with before those conversations become something more public, like a campaign or a piece of shared work. Supervised hybridization sits right at the seam between the two. On one side, it's a metacognitive exercise. Directing a model to write in my voice forces me to articulate what my voice actually is, which sentences are mine and which ones are only sound like they could be, where the framework ends and the personality begins. I've asked my students to do something similar in Spanish, so build a persona out of language, then examine it. I hadn't expected to run the same exercise on myself in English with a machine instead of a mirror. On the other side, it's a preview of the translation workflow itself. If I can supervise a model closely enough to produce something that sounds like me, I can supervise it closely enough to carry someone else's ideas across a language boundary without losing what made them worth translating in the first place. The discipline is the same discipline, only the source changes. So the uncomfortable part. I believe if I said this entirely comfortable to publish, there's a small insistent voice asking whether a reader who liked my early newsletters liked me specifically, or liked a style that turns out to be reproducible by anyone with access to the same conversations I've had with Claude. I don't have a tidy answer. What I can tell you is that the ideas in this piece, the framework, the vocabulary, the references, the way I connect translators to discomfort to a language learner's persona, all of that came from months of my own writing and thinking. That is true, by the way. Fed back into the system as material. Nothing here is invented on my behalf. It's arranged on my behalf closely under my direction, and that distinction matters more to me than I expected to. This is funny because this particular paragraph is Claude making assumptions about something I would say. I kind of agree, but when it is an AI that does it for you, you really feel strange as an author. Whereas if it is just displaying ideas or laying out ideas that you already have, and then the machine just spits them currently, I mean, I wouldn't have a problem with that. But when the machine assumes that I feel this or that way, or that I have this or that point of view, this is where I get something wrong with it, with the piece. So let's continue. So extended cognition, not outsourced cognition. Andy Clark's idea of the extended mind is useful here. The notebook, the calculator, the search engine, none of them think for you, but all of them become part of a loop your thinking runs through. A language model under close supervision is not different. It is not a different category of tool. It's a much more articulate one. And articulate tools change the shape of what gets produced without necessarily changing who's producing it. Michael Levin's thoughts as thinkers idea, which I brought up in another newsletter, applies here too, oddly enough. If thoughts already act somewhat independently inside a single cognitive system, then a supervised model isn't introducing some radical new kind of otherness into the writing process. It's making visible a kind of otherness that was arguably already there, just distributed differently. The dragon of AGI I mentioned back in December hasn't gone anywhere. It's just started drafting. For this is a kind of interesting synthesis, but I think I would have had a different type of storytelling to get to the bottom of these ideas. So, finally, what I'm asking myself, and now you, I don't think this becomes the default mode for this newsletter. By the way, I want to clarify, this will definitely not become the norm of my newsletters. I like to write my ideas. I to write everything I post on my blog and the newsletter. So it is pointless to do this type of work, of output every time. For me, it is completely pointless. It misses the point. So I don't think this becomes the default mode for this newsletter. The whole reason this project exists is to defend a very specific, very human kind of agency, and I'm not interested in quietly automating my way out of the thing I keep asking my students to develop. That is true, by the way. But I also don't think I can honestly pretend this kind of hybrid writing is a fringe curiosity anymore. It's already happening across newsletters, marketing copy, even literary fiction. mostly without the disclosure I just gave you. I watched a video a few days ago about that, by the way, in which there are many self-published authors nowadays that are more or less doing what I did with their newsletter today. So keep an eye on that. So here's the actual question I want to sit with, and I'd generally like to know where you land on it. If supervised hybridization becomes a normal part of how most writers work within the next few years, closely directed, transparently disclosed, fed by their own material, does that change what you expect from a byline? Does knowing the process change how you read the last few paragraphs now that you know? Well, you already know because I spoiled it in the beginning. But let's suppose this lands on your inbox and you read like that. So how would you feel about it? Anyway, I don't have a settled position yet, which is exactly why I wanted to publish this one openly instead of quietly. Reply and tell me how this sits with you. I read everything. See you soon, Javier. You're not forced to reply, of course, but it would be cool to know, if you're reading this, what are your thoughts on this kind of hybridization and what you like from writers, because I think that the readers have something to say about this kind of output, because we are always expecting that the author is behind the text entirely, and now we have to I don't know, get on with the times and understand that this kind of practice will be everywhere. So it is good to know what the readers are thinking, and for the readers of this newsletter, it would be nice to know how you felt reading this, knowing of course that I did this on purpose, but this will not be the norm, and I don't feel satisfied by doing this. However, I do have to admit though that I think there is some utility in the hybridization of certain texts, of certain specific types of text, perhaps for the website, for very technical stuff or very specific stuff. But I think that for things I really want to present to the public, to the readers, I do want to do it myself and take the time it requires to publish it, even if it's not perfect, even if there are grammatical mistakes or things like that. I don't mind. I mean, of course I have to check, and perhaps you even use an AI to check everything, but I do want to do the writing myself. So yeah, that's it. I will leave for those watching it, if you stumble upon this video, you will find the link in the description if you want to read it in the blog as a blog post, and if you wish you can subscribe to the newsletter. I will be working on this project again more often, so just I'll keep you updated, and see you next time. Bye.